Sometimes the best way to really get a grip on history is to go right to the source. So today, we're doing just that. We are cracking open a recently declassified document, FBI File 100-3906. We're about to see a story unfold exactly the way the investigators saw it, through their own eyes, their own memos, their own surveillance reports. Let's dive in.
Okay, so right off the bat, this file grabs your attention. This is a memo to the director of the FBI, dated March 1948. I mean, look at that subject line, typed out in all caps, Pedro Albizu Campos. And right below it, the reason for this whole investigation, overthrow or destruction of government. Yeah, there's no ambiguity here. The Bureau saw this man as a direct, serious threat to the United States.
And that, right there, leads us to the big questions for this whole explainer. Who was this guy? What were his ideas? And what did he do that made the FBI dedicate this massive amount of resources to tracking his every single move? Well, the answers, or at least the FBI's version of them, are all waiting for us right inside this file.
All right, so first up, let's see how the file itself defines its main target.
So here's the FBI's own description, their top-line assessment from that 1948 memo. They don't just see him as a leader or, a spokesperson. They use the words virtual dictator and sole policymaker. So right from the get-go, the Bureau's perspective is crystal clear. Albizu Campos and the Nationalist Party, they're one and the same. To the FBI, this guy was the entire operation.
Okay, so to understand why they saw him as such a threat, the agents first had to build a profile. They really needed to understand the man himself, and the file dedicates a whole lot of space to his background.
So the file lays out the basics. He was born in Puerto Rico, and they identify him by his race. But what's really striking here is his education. I mean, this isn't just any university. We're talking about Harvard. He gets multiple degrees, including a law degree. The guy is clearly brilliant. He also volunteers for the U.S. Army during World War I and gets commissioned as a first lieutenant.
And this is interesting. The file actually includes the FBI's own theory for what radicalized him. It says that Albizu Campos, who apparently identified as white, was just completely embittered by being assigned to a segregated unit for black soldiers. The Bureau's own analysts believed this very experience was the catalyst, the thing that sparked what they called his indefatigable anti-American attitude.
And then, of course, you get the cold, hard data of surveillance. This is his physical description when he left New York. Age, 56. Height, 5'6". Weight, 140 pounds. Hair, bushy, wavy black hair streaked with gray. This is how the Bureau saw him, not as some complex figure, but as a subject to be cataloged, measured, and tracked.
Okay, so we have a picture of the man. Now, let's get into the ideology that had the FBI so concerned.
All right, so this is really the core of his whole argument. According to the FBI, his central legal point was that the 1898 Treaty of Paris, the one that gave Puerto Rico to the U.S. after the Spanish-American War, was totally illegal. And his reasoning? Spain had already granted Puerto Rico autonomy, and that local government never, ever consented to the treaty.
And, if you buy that main argument, then all of these other points, which the file calls corollaries of the doctrine, they just logically follow. Right? If the treaty is invalid, then the U.S. has no legitimate authority. Its laws don't apply. Its presence is just an illegal occupation. And ultimately, in his view, the U.S. would have no choice but to pack up and leave. This was the revolutionary idea at the absolute heart of the movement.
But according to this file, these ideas didn't just stay in the world of theory. The Bureau documents how, in the 1930s, this all turned into violent action.
What the file lays out is this really rapid escalation all through the 1930s. It starts with clashes at the Capitol building in 1932. Then, in 1935, 4 nationalists are killed by police. In retaliation, 2 nationalists assassinate the police chief in 1936. The violence really comes to a head in the 1937 Ponce Massacre, where police killed 19 nationalists during a parade. For the FBI, this whole chain of events was the justification they needed to arrest and convict Albizu Campos.
So, for conspiring to overthrow the U.S. government by force, Pedro Albizu Campos gets hit with a 10-year sentence in federal prison. For the Bureau, you'd think the case was closed. But it wasn't going to stay that way.
And that brings us forward in time to December 1947. After serving his full sentence, Albizu Campos returns to Puerto Rico. His followers greet him as El Maestro, the master. And his return is the exact event that triggers this entire FBI file. as agents scramble to figure out what he's planning.
They don't have to wait very long. Almost immediately, he kicks off a series of fiery speeches all across the island. And the FBI's informants are right there in the crowds, just taking notes. In this speech, he's talking about Puerto Ricans being drafted into the U.S. military. His solution is, well, it's unambiguous and it's violent.
And he keeps going, framing this whole struggle as this urgent, last-ditch effort. And notice this, it's a universal call to arms, not just for men, but for women too. He's saying everyone must be prepared to fight.
And then he broadens the targets. It's not just the U.S. government anymore. It's any institution, political, economic, social, you name it, that isn't actively working for independence. In his view, they're an enemy, and they have to be removed, forcibly if need be.
And then came the bombshell. An informant gets word to the FBI that these speeches weren't just talk, they were the prelude to an island-wide armed revolt that was planned for the very near future. For the Bureau, this was actionable intelligence. The threat was no longer theoretical, it was real, and it was immediate.
So, with the threat of an island-wide revolt now on their radar, the Bureau kicks its investigation into absolute overdrive.
And I mean, they threw the whole playbook at him. They used confidential informants who were only identified in the files by codes like T1, T2. They had teams doing physical surveillance. They were monitoring his communications and digging into his finances. They even tried to recruit sources inside the local police force. This was an all-out, comprehensive effort.
I mean, the level of detail they went into is just incredible. This is a hand-drawn sketch of his hotel suite in San Juan, which an informant, a hotel clerk, gave to the FBI. They knew the layout of his rooms, where the beds were, even that the main room had a double bed and a crib. No detail was too small for them.
And as all this information poured in, they meticulously cataloged every single piece of it on inventory sheets just like this one. This form, it's called a bulky exhibit. Lists things like shorthand notes from his speeches, telegrams, letters. They were building a mountain of evidence, clearly preparing for another trial. But then, as you dig deeper into the file, you find a twist. Take a closer look at that same inventory sheet. See that? Scrawled right across the list is this huge stamp, destroyed, 4958. And it's not just this one. Page after page, you see evidence logs for tape recordings, film reels, documents, all of them marked with the same stamp. Years of carefully collected evidence, poof, gone. The Bureau destroyed it themselves. And that leaves us with this one kind of haunting question, right? We look to these files to find the truth, to see what really happened, but what does it mean when the very people writing the story are the same ones who deliberately destroy the key pieces of evidence? What part of the story are we no longer allowed to see?